They mocked him while the last shovel of dirt was still sinking into his grandfather's grave. Laughter, smirks, hands heavy with new wealth. And in the middle of it all stood Nathan Whitmore, holding a wrinkled white envelope that weighed less than a feather yet carried the force of an earthquake. Inside, a single plane ticket, nothing more. No mansion, no company, no legacy, only a destination whispered in his grandfather's trembling handwriting. 6 months later, those same people, draped in designer desperation and collapsing fortunes, would come crawling to his door, pleading for mercy. Because the man they had called a fool was the only one his grandfather had trusted to play the final, hidden move of a game that had taken 60 years to build. If silence has ever burned inside you, stay until the end. If you've ever watched people cheer while they thought you were losing, only to learn too late that they misunderstood the entire game, stay close. This story understands you, and it will haunt you. The sky over Rochester that morning felt like it had forgotten how to breathe. Thick grey clouds pressed so low they seemed to bruise the roofs of the country club, bleeding into the October air with a heavy, waiting silence. Funerals are supposed to soften a family, melt pride for a moment, remind people of their smallness, but mine didn't. Mine sharpened everyone, polished their greed, turned their voices into razors. And as we stepped off the muddy patch of earth where my grandfather had just been lowered, I could feel the shift, like wolves tensing before a meal. I stood slightly apart from them, clinging to the single object I'd been handed. A small, wrinkled white envelope that weighed almost nothing. I remember pressing my thumb against the corner, feeling the paper bend, wondering why something so light felt so final. It was the only thing in that room that seemed to belong to me. The moment we entered the mahogany-paneled chamber for the will reading, the air felt colder. Long mirrors reflected every hungry glance, every twitch of anticipation. My cousins were already celebrating in their eyes, rehearsing their triumph in the polished shine of the walls. Preston adjusted his $5,000 Armani suit as if a camera crew was waiting for him outside, his face stretched tight with confidence. His sister Maulery lounged in her chair like a bored queen, her sunglasses still on despite the dim lighting, her phone held at an angle that meant she was capturing every moment for later bragging rights. Their parents, Vernon and Beatrice, stood tall and self-satisfied, the kind of posture people wear when they know wealth is about to fall into their hands like ripe fruit. Vernon's fingers tapped rhythmically on the table, already impatient for the paperwork that would crown him king of Roland Whitmore's empire. And then there was me, the quiet grandson who had shown up in a Honda Civic with squealing brakes, wearing a suit that still carried the faint scent of chalk dust from the high school classroom I'd come from. A history teacher, a nobody in their eyes. The only one who had come to this funeral to mourn instead of to collect. Grandfather always said the truth of a person reveals itself when money enters the room. If he could see them now, I wondered whether he would have smiled or sighed. The attorney, Mr. Harwick, cleared his throat, his wire-rimmed glasses slipping slightly down the bridge of his nose. "Your grandfather revised this will exactly 1 week before his passing," he said, and something in the room tightened, like all the air had suddenly been sucked out. Vernon leaned forward, falsely confident. "We understand. Roland and I discussed the succession plan thoroughly." A lie. Even Harwick's eyes flicked with amusement at the absurdity. He began reading. The Hamptons estate, the investment portfolio, the operating company, the Manhattan penthouse, the yacht. Each word fell into the room like a stone dropped in water, creating ripples of gasps, squeals, triumphant smiles. Preston practically served himself the company before the sentence even ended. Mallory's laugh echoed like glass breaking when she realized she was getting a penthouse overlooking Central Park. But then Harwick paused. His gaze shifted toward me with an expression that looked almost apologetic. "And to my grandson, Nathan Whitmore," he said softly, "I leave this." He slid the white envelope toward me. That tiny, weightless thing that had been in my hand all along suddenly felt even smaller among the mountains of wealth that had just been handed out. Preston burst out laughing. Loud, cruel, the kind of laugh meant to humiliate. "That's it? An envelope?" Maulery actually lifted her phone, recording my face. "Oh my God, Nathan, this is too good. Please open it. This is priceless. I swallowed the heat climbing up my throat and opened the envelope with steady fingers. A one-way plane ticket. Rome. Departing in 48 hours. That was all. Preston snatched it out of my hand before I could touch the edges. A coach ticket. Oh, this is perfect. The teacher gets a vacation. Here's a thought. Maybe he left you some airline points too. Their laughter scraped against my bones. But my mother, quiet, grieving, steadfast, rose from her seat in the corner. Is that all? She asked the attorney, her voice calm but sharp enough to draw attention. One more thing, Harwick replied. A personal letter to be opened by Nathan only upon arrival in Rome. The laughter died instantly. Even Preston blinked. A letter? He scoffed weakly. What is he going to say? Sorry you're poor? Enjoy the pasta? Vernon placed a heavy hand on his son's shoulder, though he was smiling. Enough. Nathan made his choice. He rejected business. He wanted simplicity. Roland gave him something appropriate. Something appropriate. The words landed like a slap, but a quiet voice in my mind whispered, You're missing something. You're all missing something. I looked at the ticket again. The date. The time. The handwritten note. The strange deliberateness of it. And suddenly, beneath the humiliation, beneath the ache of being the family's joke, I felt something else move inside me. Curiosity. Maybe even certainty. As if, somewhere on the other side of that ocean, a door was waiting to open. So I stood, tucked the envelope back into my pocket, and met all their eyes. I guess I'd better pack. Mallory's mouth fell open. You're actually going? Nathan, nobody uses a random plane ticket from a dead man. My grandfather gave me a destination, I said. The least I can do is see where it leads. Vernon muttered, sentimental fool, under his breath. The kind of insult meant to bury a person. But as I walked out of that suffocating room, the envelope pressed warm against my palm, I knew something they didn't. Grandfather had once told me during a late-night chess game, his voice low and cryptic, the best moves, Nathan, are the ones your opponent never sees. And as the club doors closed behind me and their laughter faded into silence, I realized something chilling. Maybe this ticket wasn't a consolation prize. Maybe it was the first move. The one they weren't meant to see. The plane ticket sat on my kitchen table like a dare. A single sheet of paper, flimsy and ordinary, yet it carried a gravity that pulled at every corner of my life. My tiny apartment felt smaller than usual that night. The peeling paint, the sagging bookshelf, the water stain on the ceiling shaped vaguely like Texas. Everything around me whispered familiarity, predictability, safety, and yet I couldn't stop staring at that destination printed in bold letters. Rome, a city my grandfather had never once mentioned, a place that had no role in our family's story, or so I'd always believed. The clatter of my neighbor's dog barking next door anchored me briefly back in my life. The steady, repetitive existence of a high school history teacher who paid bills late sometimes and kept spare change in a coffee mug labeled emergency fund. A far cry from the glittering world my cousins lived in. Still, this ticket, it didn't feel accidental. Grandfather Roland never moved a piece on the chessboard without a reason. I ran my fingers over the edge of the ticket again. What are you trying to tell me? I whispered into the empty room. But silence doesn't answer questions. It just deepens them. When I finally called my mother, she picked up on the first ring. I knew you would go, she said, as if she had already lived this moment before I reached it. I shouldn't, I replied. I have classes. I have responsibilities. I can't just drop everything because a dead man left me a ticket to a country he never talked about. But she didn't hesitate. Your father once told me that your grandfather was two different versions of himself. One the world saw, and one only the past remembered. Maybe you're about to meet the one we never knew. Her voice stayed gentle, but her words landed heavy. After I hung up, I sat alone in the washed-out glow of my kitchen lights, thinking about something my grandfather once said during a chess match. He had held a knight between his fingers, examining it like an old memory. Real trust, he murmured, is doing Dr. Washington raised an eyebrow, but she handed over her signature. No one fought me. Maybe they knew something was shifting, even if they couldn't name it. By the time I reached Detroit Metro Airport, my chest felt tight, like I was stepping beyond a line I couldn't return from. The Uber driver dropped me off with a cheerful "Have fun in Italy." Fun. If only he knew. Security. Boarding pass. Gate. All of it blurred. I sat in the terminal with the envelope in my hand. For the first time, I noticed something faintly penciled in the corner. 1947. The year my grandfather was 22. The year after the war. The beginning of something in his life that he'd never spoken about. My heartbeat stumbled. Before I could think too deeply, boarding began. When I found my seat, 32B, middle seat, no legroom, the contrast struck me hard. My cousins were probably celebrating in mansions they believed belonged to them. I was being shoved between a snoring stranger and a woman who insisted on watching a loud movie without headphones. But the strange thing was, it felt right. As if discomfort was exactly where I was meant to begin. When the plane lifted off, Detroit shrinking beneath clouds, a strange calm washed over me. The quiet sensation of stepping into a story I wasn't writing. Hours later, as the plane soared over the Atlantic, I pulled out my father's old leather journal. I'd carried it for years without truly reading all of it. Now my fingers flipped through pages filled with his careful handwriting. Contracts. Notes. A life lived under the shadow of his brother, Vernon. A family built on secrets. A family I suddenly realized I didn't know at all. When sleep finally pulled me under, I dreamt of my grandfather's hands. Those hands that moved chess pieces with the precision of a man who had seen war and built empires. In the dream, he placed a knight in front of me and whispered, "You see the board, but not the game." I woke to turbulence. Hours later, the captain's voice crackled overhead, announcing our descent. My heart hammered as the plane dipped through pale clouds and the landscape of Rome emerged. Golden buildings, ancient stone, the outline of a city older than any story I had ever taught. As the wheels hit the runway, something in my chest snapped open. Fear, anticipation, recognition. I didn't know what waited for me in this foreign place. I didn't know why my grandfather had chosen Rome. But I knew, without question, that this was not a vacation. It was a summons. A move on a board I hadn't realized I'd been playing my entire life. And somewhere out there, beyond the airport glass, beyond the crowds, a truth was waiting for me. One that had lived in silence for decades. One that was about to destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. The arrivals hall in Fiumicino felt like a maze built from noise and movement. Families shouting in Italian, tourists clutching guidebooks, luggage wheels scraping across tile, life bursting everywhere. I dragged my small carry-on behind me, feeling like a ghost drifting through someone else's world. Rome was warm, humid, alive, and I was tired, disoriented, and no closer to understanding why a dead man had sent me here. I was moments from walking toward the taxi line when I saw it. A man stood beside the crowd holding a glossy white sign with my name printed cleanly across it. Nathan Whitmore. I froze. No part of me expected this. I approached slowly. "I'm Nathan." Relief softened the man's face. "Ah, finally. Please, sir, follow me." His accent curled around the words like delicate fabric. He lifted my bag before I could protest. "Your grandfather arranged everything." My heart stumbled. "My grandfather?" "Yes," he nodded, opening the door of a black Mercedes sedan so polished it looked carved from obsidian. "Mr. Rowland prepared this months ago." Months. The word hit me like a fist. He'd known he was dying. He'd known I would come. He'd planned every breath of this. I sank into the back seat. The leather hugged me, far too soft for someone who graded papers at a second-hand kitchen table. As the car wove out of the airport, I leaned forward. "Where exactly are we going?" "Mornewey Estate," he answered. "North, into the Sabine Hills. 1 hour." Mornewey Estate. The name meant nothing, yet something inside me stirred, as if the syllables unlocked a door I didn't know existed. The city thinned. The road curved through landscapes so beautiful they felt unreal. Olive groves shimmering silver in the wind, vineyards stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Small villages nestled against ancient stone walls. The air here held a different weight, like history and secrets were woven into it. "How long have you worked for my grandfather?" I asked. 20 years, he replied. "My father was his driver before me." 20 years. 20 years of September visits, visits no one in America knew about. My grandfather, the man who lectured us endlessly about transparency, who boasted about honest business, who insisted nothing mattered more than family, had been living an entire second life overseas. The thought made the back of my neck prickle. Did he talk about us? I asked quietly. The man, Lorenzo, glanced at me through the mirror. His expression softened. "He talked about you. A lot." Me. Not Vernon. Not Preston. Me. Before I could find words, Lorenzo turned down a narrower road lined with towering cypress trees. Their shadows stretched like long fingers across the stone path. Electronic gates slid open. And then I saw it. A villa emerged from the earth like something carved from light. 3 stories of honey-colored stone, covered in climbing vines, windows glowing with the warmth of centuries. Terraces overlooked valleys painted with vineyards that seemed to go on forever. It was breathtaking, painfully beautiful, but nothing prepared me for the woman who stepped through the front doors. She was older, silver hair pulled into an elegant knot, posture straight, eyes the same steel-gray shade as my grandfather's. But it wasn't her appearance that struck me. It was the way tears spilled down her cheeks the moment she saw me. She walked toward me slowly, hands trembling, as if afraid I might vanish. Lorenzo's voice was gentle. "Nathan, this is Sophia Whitmore." My breath left my body. I don't understand," I managed. She cupped my face with both hands, her touch warm, reverent, devastating. "You have his eyes," she whispered, "and your father's kindness." Her voice was rich and melodic, touched with decades of sorrow. I pulled back, shaking my head. "My grandmother died before I was born." "Your American grandmother," she corrected softly. "Yes, she did." A pause. "But I am very much alive." The world slid sideways. Before I could regain balance, Sophia gestured toward the villa's entrance. "Come. There is much you were never told, and I am done living in silence." I followed her inside, my legs barely obeying me. The villa's interior was elegant in the quiet way true wealth expresses itself. Old portraits, hand-carved furniture, paintings of vineyards spanning generations. On the far wall, photographs lined a mantel. One in particular caught my eye. A wedding photo. My grandfather, young, laughing, radiant, holding the hands of a woman far too familiar. "Sophia. We married in 1947, she said, in a small church just beyond the hills." My mouth went dry. "He never told any of us." "No," she said. Her voice held no bitterness, only a grief so deep it felt aged. "Your grandfather lived 2 lives. One born from war, and one born from duty. He loved your American grandmother. He loved our vineyard. He loved our son. He could not choose. So he hid one life inside the other. Their son. Her son. My eyes burned. My father. He never knew." "He didn't," she said gently. "Roland kept you far away from this world to protect you from a truth he didn't have the courage to face when he was young." She opened a drawer in an antique desk and placed a thick folder in my hands. "Your inheritance," she said. I stared down at it, confused. "Whitmore Vineyards International," she explained softly. "A $47 million estate. One he built with us. One he chose to leave only to you." My pulse hammered in my ears. $47 million. A hidden empire. A life kept in shadows. Before I could even breathe, Sophia opened an old laptop and clicked on a file labeled for Nathan. The screen flickered. And then, my grandfather's face appeared. Older, softer, at peace in a way I'd never seen. "Nathan," his recorded voice began, "if you are watching this, Then you trusted me enough to take the flight. And that means you are ready. My throat tightened. He spoke of my cousins and the crumbling illusions they'd inherited, of the real estate drowning in debt, of the company bleeding money, of how he'd given them everything they wanted and nothing they needed. I gave you what you never asked for, he continued. A history, a truth, a family built on something real. His eyes sharpened. And Nathan, your next move is yours alone. But remember, the pieces that look powerful aren't always the ones that matter. He paused, then whispered, "Checkmate, my boy." The screen went dark. Sophia rested a hand on my shoulder. "He loved you," she said, "more than you understood." But I couldn't speak. My grandfather's entire life, his secrets, his love, his shame, had just been placed in my hands. And the man I thought I knew had never existed at all. The vineyard stretched endlessly beneath the sky, the color of molten gold. Rows of vines glowed under the afternoon sun, their leaves whispering with each passing breeze. I stood there for a long time, longer than I expected, just listening. The air smelled of earth, aging barrels, and something older than memory. Something that felt like home, even though I'd never stepped foot here before. For 3 weeks, Italy reshaped me. I woke up to the ring of church bells echoing across hills that looked carved by God's own hand. I learned how to walk the vineyard rows, how to read the soil, how to interpret the language of grapes. I watched workers who knew my grandfather from a version of himself I had never met. A version who laughed easily, who worked with his hands, who wasn't a ghost trapped inside a business suit. And every night, as the sun slipped into wine-colored shadows, I sat with family I didn't know I had. Uncle Augusto, the son my grandfather kept hidden, looked so much like my father that some days it hurt to breathe. His gentle manners, his quiet way of moving, his deep, patient eyes. I saw the resemblance instantly, and it made me ache for the father I'd lost too young. "You have his heart," Augusto told me on my 3rd night at the villa, his voice soft as he poured wine into 2 crystal glasses. "Your father." Roland spoke of him often. He loved him, Nathan. He simply didn't know how to live one life without betraying another. I had no answers, just the heavy weight of a truth that felt both comforting and cruel. My Italian cousins, Marco and Elena, welcomed me without question. They taught me the business from the ground up, not the glamorous parts, but the real ones. The dirt under the fingernails, the early mornings, the delicate matter of balancing tradition and modernity. They didn't treat me like an outsider. They treated me like someone who had finally come home. Days passed in a rhythm I didn't realize I'd been craving. And then the call came. It was midnight in Detroit when my phone rang. My American phone, the one I barely used in Italy. The screen glowed with a name I hadn't seen since the will reading. Preston. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. "Nathan." His voice was nothing like the arrogant echo I remembered. It trembled. It broke. I need to talk to you." There was no laughter now. No superiority. No expensive confidence coating his words. "What's wrong?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "It's all gone," he said, a hollow whisper. "Everything grandfather left us. The company, Nathan, it's bankrupt. The accountants uncovered everything he hid. The penthouse, the yacht, the estate, it was all debt. Illusions. And God, I don't know what to do." The silence that followed wasn't triumphant. It wasn't satisfying in the way I once imagined revenge might taste. Instead, it was heavy with something deeper, something close to grief. Grandfather had prepared this moment. He told me it would come. Dad lost the house, Preston continued, voice shredding. Mallory's penthouse was repossessed. "We have nothing. We treated you like trash, and..." His voice cracked. "We were wrong." A strange ache tightened my chest. The boy I grew up with, the cousin who mocked me for living simply, was now drowning in a world collapsing around him. "Can you help us?" he whispered. "Not can you save us? Not we deserve better. Just help." The next day, after a restless night, I made the call everyone expected me to ignore. I offered Preston a job. Not a throne. Not a lifeline wrapped in gold. A job. Manage US distribution for Redditor wines, I said. He exhaled like a man pulled from underwater. Anything. I'll take anything. We weren't equals in power, but we became equals in humanity. Morliery took longer. Pride is a louder beast in some people. But when her influencer lifestyle evaporated and her pretty illusions cracked open, she reached out too. And beneath all the filters and self-branding, I found a woman starving for something real. In an unexpected twist of irony that would have made my grandfather chuckle, she later married Lorenzo's son. Yes, my driver's son, and moved to Rome. She works in the vineyard's marketing department now. No staged yachts. No rented penthouses. Just work. Honest work. And she's better at it than I would have ever guessed. As for Vernon and Beatrice, the king and queen of hollow prestige, they sank hardest. The Hampton estate vanished. Their investments crumbled. Their name, once a passcode into high society, became a warning. They moved into a small apartment in New Jersey. Vernon now works as a bookkeeper. Beatrice, for the first time in her life, got a job at Nordstrom. They don't speak to me. They can't look at me without seeing the truth they tried so hard to bury. But according to Preston, they've grown closer, forced to cling to each other rather than money. Maybe my grandfather intended that too. My mother, meanwhile, moved into a guest house on a California property I purchased with one of the vineyard's first distribution deals. She retired from nursing. Now she spends her days painting landscapes, vines, hillsides, sunlit windows. She says it feels like breathing again. And me? I returned to teaching part-time. My students joke about having a wine baron for a history teacher. It makes me laugh more than it should. Summers, I returned to Italy, to the land, to the family that never knew my name but loved me the moment I arrived. One evening, while playing chess with Uncle Augusto under the lantern lights of the terrace, he nudged a pawn forward and said, "You know, your grandfather always believed the Real winner is the one who knows which pieces actually matter." I stared at the board, then at the vineyard glowing beneath the moon, then at the photograph of my grandfather inside the villa, young, alive, full of promise in 1947. "He won," I murmured. Augusto smiled. "No, Nathan, you won. You just didn't realize you were playing. That old wrinkled envelope, the one they all mocked, that was never a joke. It was an invitation. To the truth. To the past. To the family buried beneath the one I thought I belonged to. In my Detroit apartment, on a shelf above the chessboard, sits the last bottle my grandfather ever produced. The label reads Redditor 2024. Underneath, in his handwriting, for Nathan, who understood that the best inheritance isn't money, it's trust. And every time I look at it, I know the old man was right. The game everyone thought they were playing, that was just the board. The real victory was happening an ocean away, in a place built on sunlight and silence. And he chose me to find it.